So, Damien, I think we're ready to go.
Sounds good. All right, welcome everybody. I see the attendee list filling out here, so we'll wait another 30 seconds or so to let everybody get into the session. All right, looks like the climbing numbers have settled down a little bit, so I'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, good afternoon. This session is entitled in the program, Enterprise Automation, the Key to Workforce Productivity. In the interest of making it a little more interesting and exciting, I've taken a little spin and it's got a slight retitling, Your Path to the Fast Lane. So we'll go ahead and get started here. First of all, by way of introduction, my name is Damien Eversman. Oh, look, I've got the same shirt on. How embarrassing. All right. Well, anyway, my name is Damien Eversman. I have a long and storied history in IT. I've been a developer, development manager, a systems engineer, enterprise architect, and now I'm Red Hat Solutions Architect. You can find all of my digicals there, how to reach me, how to friend me, how to look at my source code, how to follow everything that I do, and how to get in touch with me. I'll put a slide up again at the end of the session with the same information. And obviously the slides are going to be available in the platform. So feel free to grab that down. I do enjoy talking to people. So feel free to hit me up, send me an email, ask me questions, tweet at me, whatever you're comfortable doing. Feel free to try and get in touch. Just to give you a little bit more insight into who I am, I like to do a little bit of personalization here. Right there in the center, for those of you who don't recognize it, is the city of Chicago, which is the city that I reside in. Although when we're not in the midst of a pandemic, I do spend a fair amount of time up in Minnesota. If you look right next to the Sears Tower there, Sears Tower is the tallest building. If you look right next to it, the sort of gray building that's sort of the tallest building right next to it. The Red Hat office is in that building. And I actually, again, when not in the midst of a pandemic, spend a fair amount of time there. On the left, you see my family, who I actually took with me a year or so ago to a Red Hat conference I was attending. And of course, they're very excited about me being a Red Hat employee. And then on the opposite side, you see my elder son and our dog, who thinks that she's a full-fledged human member of the family. So with the change to Your Path to the Fast Lane, I've also spruced up the abstract here. So we're going to talk a little bit about the abstract first. Automation workflows can take your IT department from the Department of No to the Department of Go. Whether your market is citizens, students, or sales, your customers are constantly looking for ways to go to market quicker than ever before. They want a fast lane to get from point A to point B, and their initial choice is you. But you currently can only provide toll booths and traffic control. So learn how to give them a fast lane to success before they veer off into the unknown neighborhoods and intersections of shadow IT. By unifying the silos of IT through automation and the collaboration of workflows, not only will you be in the fast lane, you'll be the fast lane in no time. Yes, I really went all in on that automotive analogy, and you'll see as we go through, I really played with it. So let's talk, oops, I jumped 2 slides there. Let's talk about what we're going to discuss today. We're going to talk about what automation is, because it's good that we all have a starting point. We're going to talk about what it's good for. Then we're going to talk a little bit about collaboration and how it fits into this whole picture. Then we're going to take the two, bring them together, and talk about enterprise automation. After we go through and define enterprise automation and what's really great about it, we'll talk about some of the pitfalls that a lot of people see when they first try and dip their toe into enterprise automation. And then at the very end, I'll throw out some wins that I see and that my company Red Hat sees with some of our customers and who are adopting enterprise automation. So first off, why automate? That's always a good question. It's a good place to start. But before we talk about the why, let's really talk about what automation is. It's good that we'd all be on the same page here. So I went off to Merriam-Webster and I pulled up the definition of automation. And there's actually 3 of them. You see all 3 of them here. And if you look really closely at those definitions, every single one of them includes the word automatic in it. It's not really helpful to use a word when you're trying to define a word. I know my son, who's in high school, would get a very bad grade if that was his definition. So I've put together my own definition, uses pieces from each of those definitions, but leaves the word automatic out of it. Automation is the technique of making some process operate with the need for minimal or no human intervention, which is kind of exciting. It's some people are trepidatious about it, but in this sense, it's actually pretty exciting. So before we go a little bit farther into that, let's talk about actual benefits, because everyone always wants to get down to brass tacks. Let's hear about the numbers, right? And here at Red Hat with Ansible Tower, we actually see a lot of benefits in our customers, and they happen pretty early on in the adoption, right? When you talk about security incidents, we see a 94% reduction in recovery time after security incidents. And we'll talk about a couple of those later on when we get into it. We also see, an 84% savings in deploying workloads like generic systems, appliances, and that sort of thing, just getting things out in the hands of our users faster. And then finally, we see a 60% reduction in the number of man hours required for customer deliveries. And here by customers, we mean, if you're a university, we mean the students or the faculty. If you're a state or a local government, we mean the citizens. And then obviously for the public or the private sector, we mean customers. There is a definite measurable ROI. We have a lot of information about that. You can actually grab the link at the very bottom of this slide there to get more information on that. But the really exciting thing is that we see those changes very quickly. Our customers start seeing benefits within just a few months of implementing automation. So what can we automate? That's a big question, right? Well, with Ansible automation, the question is probably better placed for what can't you automate, right? Whether it's a cloud provider like AWS or Azure or Google or IBM, whether it's virtualization like VMware or Hyper-V, your Windows machines, your Linux machines, your network devices, security devices like firewalls, monitoring tools, DevOps tools, it goes on and on and on. Really, if something is reachable on the network, odds are it can pretty easily be automated. So there is one more aspect to why automation is important. And that's really sort of the negative side of things, right? It's not grabbing headlines, right? We actually had just a few weeks ago, or I guess it was 2 weeks ago, we had a very similar situation to this, but I'm actually talking about the OG AWS outage that happened back in 2017. So we had one recently where AWS went down just a couple of weeks ago and a lot of the internet was out, and it was almost a repeat of this 2017 incident. You see here, Daniel Barber, a pundit on Twitter, tweeted that it was kind of terrifying just how much of the internet went out because of the AWS outage. Now, there were a whole bunch of headlines the first day or two, but after that, things started to clear up, and next thing you knew, everybody had forgotten about it, except for AWS. You better believe AWS hadn't forgotten about it. They did a full root cause analysis and published a 10-page document explaining exactly what had happened, how it had happened, and what they were doing to make sure it didn't happen again. So this right here is a quote from that document. Their root cause analysis was basically that an authorized S3 team member executed a command which was intended to remove a small amount of servers. Unfortunately, one of the inputs to the command was entered incorrectly and a larger set of servers was removed than intended. Now, what's not contained in that quote, but is scattered throughout the 10 pages of analysis that they published, was that was a routine thing that authorized S3 team member was doing. It was something that he did on a regular basis, And the mistake that was made was he accidentally hit a key twice. Instead of entering a 1, he hit an 11 in the execution of his command, which caused an extremely higher number of machines to completely come out. So this is what we're talking about here. This is a person doing a repetitive task, something that they do on a regular basis, and getting lazy, not paying attention, letting their mind wander, accidentally entering the wrong information in that repeated task and causing a catastrophe. And there are stories all over the internet. It's not just AWS. You hear stories all over the internet about people incorrectly configuring something, leading to security breaches, leading to downtime, leading to things that you don't want to happen. So automation is kind of like automotion, going back to my analogy at the very beginning. It gets you from point A to point B in a faster and more reliable fashion. It's a repeatable process. It's more dependable than what came before, right? If you're doing something over and over and over, that's where automation shines. That's not where humans shine. We want to be creative. We want to be doing novel and interesting tasks, not the repeated drudgery. And then finally, it's just a tool. It's a tool in the practitioner's toolbox. It's one of many, but it's an important one. We'll come back to where that tool fits into everything after we talk about the collaboration connection. So collaboration is important. Let's start with the definition. Once again, Merriam-Webster defines collaboration as to work jointly with others or together, especially in an intellectual endeavor. Oh, that's kind of nice. To cooperate with or willingly assist an enemy of one's country, and especially an occupying force. This is the one that seems to lean more towards government IT. I don't know. And then finally, to cooperate with an agency or instrumentality with which one is not immediately connected. So let's talk about collaboration and what its benefits are, right? So I have my little Yoda quote there, not baby Yoda, older Yoda. Sharing leads to collaboration, collaboration leads to DevOps, and DevOps leads to enlightenment. So let's talk about DevOps, because that's really the big buzzword that everybody talks about now when it comes to collaboration. So DevOps can be described in 5 tenets, and those 5 tenets can be summarized in the acronym CALMS. So CALMS stands for culture, automation, lean, measurement, and sharing. So culture is the foundation upon which everything is built. Nothing happens in IT anymore without having a culture around it, without having something to foster that change. Automation, we've kind of already talked about that. That's removing that toil, that drudgery, that repetitive nature of work. Lean talks about smoothly transitioning between work centers, and we'll get into that a little bit later when we get into enterprise automation. Measurement, obviously important. We don't know if we're making improvements if we're not measuring how we do things before and after them. So it's very important to make sure you measure everything that you do. And then finally, sharing. Sharing is focusing on breaking down those silos, sharing knowledge, best practices, making sure that any improvements that we make are improvements that we share throughout the organization. Now, what's really important is the way these work together. Normally, it's described as like a house with the foundation, but in this case, since we're doing the automotive analogy, let's talk about it being an engine, right? Culture is the camshaft, right? It's what drives everything. Without that, everything else falls apart, right? And then we have these pistons that are all equally important in getting that culture engine moving forward, whether it's automation, lean, measurement, or sharing. It's really important that they're all working together to drive that culture of collaboration and DevOps together. So DevOps is like the guardrails of IT, right? It keeps some things together and it separates some things to make sure that they don't get in each other's way. Right? By defining roles for each and every person within their organization, everybody knows which way they're supposed to be headed and which way the traffic is going, and no one steps on each other's toes or creates a fender bender, right? We define processes and automation to keep everything smoothly moving without the hiccups. And then we use lean processes to actually remove those delays, those traffic jams when we're actually handing stuff off from one work center to another. And then finally, what's most important about DevOps and about collaboration is the sharing of those best practices. When we discover some efficiency, when we discover some process change or tweak, when we discover some technology that helps us the best, we make sure that everybody knows about that so that we can make sure that the benefits that we see get spread out through the entire organization. So collaboration is like the rules of the road. It's the infrastructure we share, the streets, the highways, the guardrails. It's the laws we abide by and the unspoken agreement that we all see that we're going to do what is right? It's the culture of the road and then the support that the roadway provides us. So let's bring those two together. Let's bring automation and collaboration together, and let's explore enterprise automation. So we have yet another new word, enterprise. What is the enterprise? And I'm not talking about Star Trek here. Sorry, Trekkies, if you're in the audience. Once again, Merriam-Webster says, enterprise is a project or undertaking that is especially difficult, complicated, or risky. Sounds like some of the projects that we might be doing in IT. It's also a unit of economic organization or activity, especially a business organization, and a systematic, purposeful activity. And finally, it's the readiness to engage in daring or difficult action, initiative. Once again, it seems like Merriam-Webster was a little prescient that I was coming along. So, enterprise automation is the race car of automation. Whether we're talking rally car, F1, stock car, NASCAR, whatever your preferred racing type is, I realize that I'm really wearing this analogy thin. Automation and collaboration to the extreme. This is where we bring the best, most finely tuned elements of those two things and bring them together, and then use them to bring our teams even closer in that collaboration and enable cross-silo automation. This is where we're going to see some of the biggest benefits that you see with automation, and it comes from automating from start to finish. So I'm going to take you through a little exercise here. We're going to do an enterprise automation journey. Now, what you see before you is a diagram of a typical provisioning process when we're trying to stand up an application. For those of you who do this day to day, in and out, I realize this is extremely oversimplified, but we're just using it for demonstration purposes here, right? So there's 7 steps across the screen that are all different steps that might happen if I, for instance, come in and request an application to be deployed into the enterprise. Right, so we need to provision the VM and the operating system. We need to secure it. We need to allocate storage, configure the network. We need to actually load the software, the application software. We need to secure that application software. And then we actually need to make it available to the users, whether, again, it's the students, the citizens, the customers, right? So each of those processes is manually going to take someone time, right? And it's going to be a different group of people. Some of these might be handled by the same people, but odds are that this is going to involve people spread throughout the enterprise. So I'm taking a stab in the dark and saying that each of these processes averages out to be about an hour. Some of them might be longer, some of them might be less. Obviously, the making it available to everybody will make that one 30 minutes. It's a little less. And in a fully manual organization, I'm also saying that handoff time from one person to the next is going to be a variable number of hours, but we'll say 8 hours, right? Each of these happens over the course of a day. It's possible that it could be less, but it's likely that it's more. In many cases, we see customers where one of these handoffs takes 2-3 weeks sometimes. So if we just use these nice round numbers that I've put in, we see that the total time spent by somebody performing these processes is 6.5 hours. That's an awful lot for a process that they probably do on a regular basis. And we also see that there's standby time in between each of these that adds up to another 48 hours. So what do we end up with? The time that it takes to go from point A to point B, in this case, from nothing to a fully provisioned and launched application, is almost a week and a half of work hours. That's a lot of time. And it's because manual processes take significant amount of time, and process shifting, moving from one work center to the next, actually takes even more. So The first step, let's help people, enable people to take these repetitive processes and make them faster. So let's provide tools to each of these people along the way that helps them speed up the process, right? So say we get some virtual machine management system in, and we allow those users to automate things, right? And some security scanning tools that repeat that process very easily. And throughout the whole thing, we give and enable each of these people to automate their jobs. Some of them get it down to 15 minutes. Some of them get it down to 10 minutes. At the very end, maybe it's just 5 minutes to actually open that thing up to the world, right? So now we've got the actual human processing time down to just an hour and a half or less. That's awesome, but the problem is we still have that handoff piece. We still have that part where we're moving from one workstation to another. In the old days of the automotive industry, it's after the sheet metal went through stamping, it went into a pile and waited until the welder was available. And then it went into another pile and waited until a riveter was available, and on and on and on. This next piece that we're talking about here is the piece that the assembly line in the automotive industry really fixed. And it's the piece that's the most important to that. And that's taking out that handoff time, leaning up that fat that's in between each and every single one of these processes, right? So that when I finish triggering that automation to provision the VM, it automatically goes into the next automation piece that the security individual really keeps up and running. What it does is it takes the biggest chunk out of that time. All of those hours and hours and hours drop down to just a half an hour in this process. We've now taken something that took almost 2 weeks down to less than 2 hours. And it's because the repeated processes are happening automatically in quick succession, and the employees that spent most of their time dealing with the drudgery of constantly spinning up VMs, constantly running security scans or deploying things, it enables them to actually stop focusing on doing that over and over and start focusing on bigger and better things, things that are actually going to make a difference. Things like finding new solutions to novel problems, like improving the processes. Instead of just doing them over and over and over, they can start improving those processes even more. This is one of the important things about this. This kind of automation that we're talking about here isn't about slimming out the workforce. In fact, no, it's about giving them the ability to shine in their jobs, giving them the job satisfaction of being able to feel like they're making a difference instead of doing the same repeatable process over and over. So what does that look like? Well, this is Ansible Tower that I'm showing you here. And Ansible Tower is Red Hat's product that actually enables this sort of enterprise automation, the ability to really enable people to not only automate their tasks, but then enable those tasks to flow together neatly. So it includes things like role-based access control, which is really important because you don't want the wrong people triggering the wrong automation on the wrong resources. It enables you to do things like deploy applications or set up configurations or do all sorts of things with a push button access, right? If I'm the person that actually manages a virtual machine in the data center, and it's a virtual machine that developers are using to test things, I don't want to have to constantly answer the phone when the developer wants that machine rebooted. I'd like to enable her to actually trigger that to happen. And that's something that you can do with this sort of automation. It logs everything centrally so you know where everything happens, when it happens, how it happens, but it also provides you with workflows. And these are workflows that actually help you match these processes, right? So workflows like this one, where you can actually come into a process and you can actually have decision points. You can have multiple parallel processes. You can actually remediate problems that happen, and you can build all of this into an automation workflow, right? We've seen workflows as complicated as taking a ticket that might initially be put into your ITSM system, whether it's ServiceNow or something like that, and automatically go through an IT process of provisioning and building up a complete application release, and then go back and update the ticket saying it's been done. And you don't need to engage several or dozens, or you don't need to engage an entire staff in order to do a simple repetitive process. So enterprise automation is like self-driving smart cars, but it's even better than that. It's like a world where all of the cars are smart and they work together and they talk to each other, and you don't have the problems of humans maybe not paying attention when they're doing something that they've done over and over and over. You know, we talk about how most accidents happen within a few miles of the home because that's when you're the most lax with your attention when you're driving. This enterprise automation is the way to solve that problem. It's all of the fun without all of the work. And it keeps the eyes on the roads and the hands on the wheel for you so that you can start processing those things and make sure that everyone is doing the right thing in the right lane at the right time. So now that I've sold you on this, let's talk about some of the bumps that you might come across along the way, these potholes on the road to enterprise automation. So these are the things that might take you off the beaten path and actually might give you some problems. And there's really four that we see a lot, four common ones. And those are not everyone sharing or even knowing the vision, the tendency to return to that silo and that kingdom building, the fear of automation, and the lack of support from above. So I'm going to talk about each one of those a little bit. So the first one is that enterprise automation needs to be a shared vision. It's going back to the term that I talked about when talking about DevOps. It's a cultural change. When not everybody shares that vision, the culture gets fractured. People get to the point where then maybe they start not trusting the tools or misusing the tools. And if they don't trust the tools, they're not going to use them. And it's where disconnections occur. It's kind of like Tesla Autopilot, if you remember the headlines from a couple months back, right? Everyone needs to be on the same page and understand how it works. So we're in for a really abrupt stop at 87 miles an hour. The next one is that everyone wants their own kingdom, right? This is the tendency for everybody to protect themselves with walls and organizations to build up those silos around themselves to protect from other flaws that might be happening in the system, right? It gives you the ability to point fingers if you've got a wall built around yourself. But it also gives you no reason to share, no reason to collaborate, and it gives you no reason to actually benefit from these sorts of things. The thing that a friend of mine used to say is that there's no place for battlements or barricades in enterprise automation. The only tower is Ansible Tower. The next one, and this is a big one, is people fear automation because we talk so much in the news about how automation means replacing humans with machines and that sort of thing. And with this sort of IT automation, that is you couldn't be farther from the truth on this one, right? Everyone's concerned that we're going to bring in automation here in the middle, and it's going to remove everybody from the connection to their day-to-day job. And what actually happens is it enables these people to be rock stars. Instead of having to do the same drudgery and toil every day, whether it's installing an operating system or provisioning a new cloud workload or dealing with firewalls or routing, instead of having them have to do that day in and day out, they have the ability to automate those tasks. And now they can focus on bettering their knowledge and understanding, finding process improvements, and improving the overall automation and applications that we use. Finally, the question of bottom up or top down. And the answer is yes. This sort of thing needs to come from both directions. In order for enterprise automation to be a success, it's got to be accepted by everybody and support from the top. It's got to be supported from the top. Without an enterprise-wide direction, it's going to fail because it's going to be fractured and there's not going to be any agreement. But without that grassroots approval of the process, people aren't going to trust the tools and they're not going to use them. So it's really important that everybody is on board. And that's that culture change that we talked about. So last automotive analogy. Whether it's a simple flat tire, a cracked engine block, a multi-car pileup, enterprising automation, not implementing enterprise automation can be enough to keep you off the road. So to that end, there's a lot of resources out there. You know, whether you have a fully stocked garage in your organization and you can tinker with this to your heart's content, or you want to bring in an organization that is really an expert at working on that automation vehicle, there's a lot of resources out there, and everything from totally do it yourself all the way up to totally be trained from soup to nuts, it can be done. So let's talk about some people who have actually successfully done it. So these are just a few wins from our experience at Red Hat. Obviously, there are a lot of others. Believe it or not, one of our biggest customers is Microsoft. Microsoft and Red Hat have been partnering for a really long time on a lot of stuff in the enterprise. But automation is one of the places where Microsoft came to Red Hat and said, how can you help us? Microsoft's entire corporate network is managed through a series of Ansible playbooks and using Ansible Tower to actually help them keep that network up and running. It's very exciting. And this quote here from Bart Dvorak, who is the engineering manager for their network operations, really talks about how adopting Red Hat Ansible automation really helped them solve a lot of problems and take a lot of drudgery out of the day-to-day. Surescripts, healthcare, they actually use Ansible to manage their infrastructure. It really helps them provision new infrastructure and deprovision old infrastructure quickly, efficiently, and reliably. And for them, they considered it a huge win because they went from a huge backlog of infrastructure changes to being able to be on top of infrastructure changes in less than a few days. EMC is Energy Market Corporation. They're actually in Asia Pacific, and they actually use it to make sure that their system, to use it as part of a monitoring suite around their systems to make sure that their systems are up and running reliably. They use it to keep everything from configuration drift to just generally misconfigured things to begin with out of the problems. They are an energy market corporation that is really an integral part of getting energy provided out to all of their customers. And if they had faults, it would be possible outages around the region. And then finally, it's even used in banking. The Reserve Bank in New Zealand uses it to make sure that their security is fully up and running, that the integrations between all of the different security devices and protocols that they have in place in their hardware continues to be up and running and functional. So for them, it's really been a boon to make sure that they are protected against a lot of the bad actors that come in when banking is concerned. So another thing that I wanted to share with you, and I know you're probably looking at this slide and thinking October 13th and 14th, that was 2 months ago. What am I going to do with that, Damien? Ansible Fest this year. Ansible Fest is our annual sort of customer gathering where we have all sorts of presentations about automation, enterprise automation processes and procedures. It was fully virtual this year, as this event and many other events are. And it was really exciting. And there were a lot of things that were shared there, and there's new content that's being added. If you go to ansiblefest.ansible.com, you can register right now, and all of that content that happened back in October is still fully available to anybody who wants to go watch it, download it. There's tons of resources there, and there's a lot of really good information there to help you start or continue your enterprise automation journey. So my name is Damien Eversman. This is me. This is how to reach me. And if you guys have any questions or anything, I've actually got both of the chats up here in my command center. So feel free to throw your questions in the chat and I'll answer. And if not, then I'll give you guys 10 minutes back and I'll head over to the IBM booth. So any questions, anybody? Don't all jump at once. Thank you very much. This is one of my favorite presentations to give, so I'm glad you liked it too. I'll wait here a few more minutes, but I'm not seeing any questions come up. So the presentation is downloadable from the platform. I'll be heading over to the Red Hat IBM booth. I'll hang out there for probably another 20 minutes or so and answer any questions you have. Otherwise, here's my contact information. Please hit me up, drop me a line, tweet at me, send me a link connection on LinkedIn, whatever you want. I love to talk to people about this stuff. Have a wonderful afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for participating, and I hope you have a good time at the rest of the conference.